I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
And this is Oeuvre Busters. Whoa! Woo.
A very quick introduction.
It was really fast. Yeah, I
You were just feeling it, right?
How are you doing? How are you doing, George?
Good.
What's happening? What's new and exciting in 2020?
I think I've decided to become a surfer.
A what?
A surfer?
Like to surf?
Yes. Oh yeah. Not online, which I already do way too much of. I mean, like,
yeah, God,
get out and get those waves.
Is
bruh.
this your new like I moved to California and you become a surfer?
I know that was just.
Are you gonna buy a surfboard?
I probably am at some point. Yeah.
Oh my God! You bought a guitar this year. You can't have two white dude midlife crises issues in 20. This is not the year for this.
I was just thinking about that too. I was like, oh, well, is this part of my midlife crisis? And if it is, it's definitely safer than getting a Ducati and just dying on the BQE.
I'm gonna pitch you though. So you're in a bar when those things exist again, and some girl's like, "So you're a professor, huh?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do for fun?" You're gonna say the following three things. You're gonna say, "Well, I play guitar.
I play guitar.
I recently took up surfing, and I host a movie podcast with left-leaning political views." Bitch, that girl's leaving.
I'm the whitest.
That girl is out of there. She's like, "Oh yeah. I'm the whitest man. I am the whitest man that ever lived."
We're 30 seconds in, and we got a Weezer reference.
It's amazing. It's going so well.
What was I gonna say? Just quick.
All right, let's.
I'd lead with poetry. I think. Top three things.
Oh, that's right. You are a poet.
Yeah.
But chicks don't dig that anymore. Chicks. Jesus Christ.
Chicks don't
Women don't dig that anymore. Apologies.
So Liam,
I do listen to Weezer, so I might have some retrograde sexual politics.
did that new album come out?
No, they delayed it. Van Weezer. I'm bummed. Hang on, let me just turn off the thing so I can't see my face. Hide self view. Best thing about Zoom. So George.
Yes.
What a
dramatic
pause.
What do you do? I'm just grabbing my water.
So George.
So Liam.
What are we here to talk about? I don't have a good transition for this. What are we here to talk about?
What are we here to do? So Liam, we're here to discuss 1950s Scandal.
Shubun in Japanese from 1950.
Exactly.
You said that already.
I did say that
Let's
already.
do it again. So George, what are we here to discuss?
We're here to discuss Scandal from the year 1950.
Shubun, I believe, is the Japanese pronunciation. By the way, I'm trying not to butcher these, but if I do, I apologize.
Yeah, same here with the names.
I'm trying not to.
Totally.
It's hard. Yeah, Scandal. George, what's going on in Scandal?
Right,
what happens in Scandal?
Well, Liam, Scandal tells the story of Ichiro Aoi, a painter, becomes embroiled in a scandalous situation, hence the title, when he is seen... kind of in private at a hotel with an actress by the name of Miyako Saijo.
Miyako Saijo?
Yeah. A photograph of the two is published in a scandal rag or like a rag by the name of Amour, of course.
Amour.
And
can you say it again with a French accent?
Amour.
Oh.
And yeah, basically they run a story on her because she kind of refuses to kind of play ball with them because she's an actress and she won't give them an interview, I believe.
She's a singer.
Oh, she's a singer. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, he becomes embroiled. Ichiro becomes embroiled in this scandal. He decides to sue the magazine. At some point, he's approached by down in his luck lawyer by the name of Hirota. And Hirota basically says to Ichiro that he hates the tabloids as much as he does, and that he's basically taking on his case as a kind of like vengeance or like personal animosity. Later on in the film, we find out that Hirota has a daughter who's suffering from tuberculosis. He is then approached by Amour and bribed to throw the lawsuit case in court because he desperately needs the money for his sick daughter. At the very end of the movie, Hirota decides in court to do the honest thing, and he confesses that he was bribed by the court. By Amour, and basically the defendants, Ichiro and Miyako, win the case, and everybody lives happily ever after at the end.
Yeah, that's Scandal. It was directed by Akira Kurosawa. It was his 10th film. It was produced by Takashi Koide. It was written by Akira Kurosawa and Ryozo Kikushima, starring Toshiro Mifune as Aoe, Takashi Shimura as Otokichi Hiruta, the classic Noriko Sengoku as Sumi, Itaro Ozawa as Hori, the publisher of Amour, and Shirley Yamaguchi as Miyako Saijo. We're not going to get into it here, but Shirley Yamaguchi is an actress worth reading about.
Really?
She had an amazing, amazing life. Like, she was only an actress for a certain amount of years, and then she moved on to like being involved in politics, like really, really interesting. She's sort of covered a little bit in our friend Stuart Galbraith's book,
Whoa.
The Emperor and the Wolf. The music in the movie is by Fumio Hayazaka, and I think the music is great in this movie. I thought that really stuck out to me, so I wanted to highlight that. George, what did you think of the movie?
I was not a huge fan of this, in all honesty. The first hour or so really captivated me, and in all honesty, once the lawyer Hiruta shows up, that's when the film kind of lost me, because at that point it fell into this really kind of melodramatic tone that did not work for me. And you actually put something in the notes that I was also thinking about. I was like, oh yes, this film really reminds me of this other particular kind of director's films, and we could talk about that. But yeah, I was like, this feels like very maudlin and very melodramatic for Kurosawa. Like, he's very, I think,
right,
like leaning into those just kind of like tropes in a really kind of
the melodramatic tropes.
Yeah, in a really kind of powerful way that I was just like not feeling it.
I hear you. I like this movie a lot, actually. At times I find it like overwhelming how much I feel like it achieves. That being said, I think it's like kind of a flawed movie. In Emperor and the Wolf, Stuart's book, he talks about how Kurosawa was criticized for being the most Western of Japanese directors, which I don't think is I don't think that's something that like Kurosawa loved about the reputation he held, but like this is his Westernization big swing. I feel like this movie is. And one thing that I noticed, let's just get it. Like, I think you thought the same thing. There's a moment midway through the film, a section of this film takes place at Christmas.
Yeah.
And in the sequence that we're describing, there is a moment when Hiruta, played by Takashi Shimura, and Aoe, played by Mifune, go out drinking. And they get very drunk in a bar, and everyone starts to sing. Like, there's this really, really, I thought, powerful moment where these two old drunks are like, we're all gonna do better next year. And it's like it felt weirdly like, well, this year is lost, but next year will be better, which like kind of hit me for on a 2020 level. But it then cuts to a long, exaggerated shot of the stars with Mifune and Shimura, Hiruta and Aoe talking to each other, and I was like, is this an It's a Wonderful Life reference?
It definitely feels that way. Did you also mention that there's that scene where they're like singing? Sorry if you mentioned that. You said they went to the party and they're like
they're singing at the Christmas party.
Yeah, and that scene, the scene with the stars worked really, really well for me. The scene of them
singing, it was beautiful.
Felt like, again, like really just kind of like melodramatic and maudlin, like over the top.
Oh, that's so funny. I thought it really worked because everyone could actually sing.
Yeah.
I was taken in by the harmonies of it. I also think that like one thing that I love about Kurosawa is his ability to make scenes like that work. Like, I don't know if it's a great like scene, but he can pull that off. Like, he's one of the few directors where like people breaking into song doesn't feel like a complete like, ugh. You know what I mean? Like it's not a musical, but the feeling is so affecting and so like it's so effective. There's times when you can really feel the like Shakespearean influence on Kurosawa, and in this movie in particular, like two examples are just like scenes with crowds or scenes like in the Amour, the shitty scandal rag company, where people are talking about what's going on, and it feels like that first scene in Julius Caesar when you have like two citizens talking to each other. It's like the Greek chorus,
right?
And this moment where they're singing feels like that too. It kind of worked on me.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, those seem like stretches to me in terms of those kind of comparisons, especially I guess within this film. I don't know. It just like I was so into. So the opening scene where he's like on the Mifune's character is like on the mountain and he's painting, and there's some great like comedy there as well because he's like painting the mountain and like people are looking over his shoulder and like, what are you painting? And he's like, oh, the mountain. And somebody's like, oh, it looks like it's moving in your painting. And he's like, well, yeah, like the mountains move. And they pause and they look over to the mountain and they look back and like the mountains move. And he's like, yeah, if you look at them in a certain way. I don't know. I was just like so taken by that character immediately. And like he rides the motorcycle. He's so cool. It's like a great, cool Mifune. Yeah, that opening scene is one of my favorite scenes from any Kurosawa movie.
Amazing.
Yeah, because it's so human.
Yeah. It's like simple and like it's actually kind of a profound scene about an artist's relationship with like the people around them, and this like an artist being in a place capturing something with like the locals standing there. Like, sure, it's a little comedic, but like,
no, it's beautiful.
It's just the fact that he's like, yeah, the mountains move, and they're sort of standing there, and it's just a really, really, it's like a very humanist scene, very natural scene.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing scene, and also, like the motorcycle also becomes, and his art too, right? There's like these allusions to his art being like too Western, and at some point he says something about like the fact that he no longer draws nudes because. Like, I forget what it is. He basically says,
Japan might not really be ready for it or something like that.
So it's interesting to kind of think about what you just said about, like, Kurosawa being annoyed at, like, perceptions of him as being, like, a westernized director. And here, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, that Mifune's character in this can be a stand-in for Kurosawa in a variety of ways. In particular, let's say, about him, like, commenting back on, like, all of his critics as far as him being like too westernized or too modern even, because the motorcycle becomes a symbol of this kind of modern like individuality that Mifune's character kind of possesses.
I don't give a fuck kind of mentality.
Yeah, but I think he specifically says that, right? They ask him about the motorcycle and he's like, oh, it's like this cool thing that I have. Like it becomes this fetishized object, but it also kind of speaks to his like iconoclast like status in the society.
Totally. You know, this... Like, to speak to that a little bit, one thing that when you read the quote for why Mifune wanted to make this film, in this book, The Films of Akira Kurosawa by Donald Ritchie, he says, Scandal was described by Kurosawa himself as a protest film about the rise of the press in Japan and its habitual confusion of freedom with license. Personal privacy is never respected, and the scandal sheets are the worst offenders. Which... makes the film feel a little quaint to me. Like, oh, look at these. Like, there's something. I mean, granted, it's 70 years old, right? But this idea of like this quaint idea of him being like angry about tabloid, which we've all just come to accept tabloids as like part of our lives, right? Our fucking president is a tabloid guy. It's just kind of part of our. So it doesn't. It's obviously still timely, but it feels remarkably quaint. But yeah, it definitely feels like a melodrama, and it feels like a couple different movies. The first hour feels like it's about the scandal. The second, Shimura shows up, which Takashi Shimura as Hiruta is like, it's a very different performance than he's given in any of the other movies. Mm-hmm. But he kind of takes over the movie, and the second half is this like, would you say it's like a morality play about like what the right decision to make is about his balancing like his family and his legal responsibilities mixed with his like need to make money.
Well, that's when it becomes a Capra film, and when it stops being like a Kurosawa film. And
100%. It's like two different movies.
Yeah, and again, I was just more interested in like the story of these two artists who find themselves, as kind of pawns in this really cynical media play, and kind of what happens to them and the potential for that story as a commentary about like the modern artist and society. So that's what I was like looking forward to. I was like, oh, the first 45 minutes of this film are fucking great. You're getting Mifune doing like Mifune shit. You're getting Shirley was it Yamaguchi? Was it the actress? Yeah, doing like amazing work as well. She's also an artist, and they're like these powerful roles and performances. And then And I love him as an actor, but Shimura's character shows up, and I'm like, I'm checking out now. And that's the other time it becomes like a Capra thing too. It's about like this, yes, it becomes this morality play about like good people who are thrust in like really difficult situations, and then they have to decide what the right thing to do is. And it leads in this like very like melodramatic final courtroom scene. I'm like, fuck that.
Is this kind of a reactionary movie?
Ooh.
The reason that I say that is...
word. That's my word.
I said it. I took it. The reason that I say that is because at the beginning of the movie, you have this character you have these two people, this like artist who like kind of a little bit makes fun of these like country bumpkin types a little bit. And he rides a motorcycle, and he's just like gone by himself to check into this like spa. And this woman shows up, and she's a singer, and they're kind of like media-ish figures who just kind of want to have a normal life. And they get caught up in this like scandal thing. But like what it takes to save them is this like old-doddering dude who's like from a different time in Japan. Like what we need to do is like focus on the morality of this like old dude who kind of is terrible at his job, but like, and ultimately the fact that it shifts focus and ends up being about him. The least interesting thing to me in this movie is the bribe. It's so uninteresting because it makes it about like a less interesting thing. It makes it very, very kind of like classic. Yeah, like you said, Capra. Like we suddenly have to deal with a morality play where when it feels very reactionary to shift the focus to this like 50, again, it's crazy. Shimura was probably 44 when they made this movie, but he looks 60.
He looks really old,
but to shift the focus to this like old dude. And I also think it's a little reactionary because it's like Kurosawa being like, oh, what happened to personal privacy? Not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but the idea of like, it feels like the first movie he's made where I feel like his finger is in my face, like, you shouldn't do this. It's bad.
Yeah, it's very didactic. No,
super didactic.
But the only problem with that is that the way I see it is it's kind of like two different competing versions of the modern world. So that Mifune's character, again, is this very modern artist who is kind of doing things, for example, like in his artwork that is not like understood, I put that obviously in quotation marks, like in his cultural milieu because he's borrowed like either from like Western sources or because he's a very like modern contemporary kind of person. And the cynicism of like the tabloid industry, which is just about, again, producing scandalous headlines.
And making money and not being truthful.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of being an artist is to like express a truth.
And yes, and they're just like cynics. Because I also think like the doddering old, like down on his luck lawyer is not, I mean, yeah, he like saves him at the end because he confesses his own like moral failings. But he's also like a total fuck up. You can't watch this movie and be like, oh, I'd rather be the old-timey, let's say, like lawyer rather than like the young, sexy artist guy who's like really just completely standing up for himself and this other woman, right? Like he's clearly like the hero, at least for the first half. Like there's nothing about like Mifune's character that is reprehensible. He's like just he's just himself. You know, he's like a good guy through and through.
I actually really love this performance, and I feel like he's barely in the movie after a certain point. It becomes this like, you know, battle of the soul for Otokichi Hiruta, and suddenly Mifune's character disappears to the background. But I feel like this is a return to some of his like more subtle work, whereas like in Stray Dog, he's very intense all the time. He's a little... I took an acting class in college with this really great teacher, and he once said like, hey, you know, when you're acting, sometimes you give a little bit too much like, hey asshole, as opposed to don't fuck with me, like confidence over like he really said that to me. I think he was like, you're trying too hard. And like the Stray Dog performance is one where the guy's name was Tom Nellis. He's a great actor, Tom Nellis. But the Mifune character in Stray Dog is a lean forward kind of guy. He's always trying to like figure stuff out, whereas his character in this film is a little more back on his heels but still in control. Like it's a completely different performance confidence wise, you know. He's very quiet. He never raises his voice. At a certain point, he punches Hori, the publisher, in the face, which is really a great sequence. But he almost is so subtle in this movie that he like disappears until the end when he gives a speech.
Yes. But I also love that moment too later on. It's a very weird one, right? Where he like revs up the motorcycle indoors.
Yeah, because he doesn't want to listen to anyone talking.
Yeah, and it becomes this like, but it also becomes like a representation, I think, obviously, of like his own angst and like suffering, right? Like he wants to kind of like yell and express himself, but he can't, so he just kind of like revs the engine.
Right. That's really interesting.
It becomes like an interesting kind of like representation of like, yes, this like inner angst that he can't kind of express. But no, you're right. It's a very much a more passive, introspective kind of role, which I mean is obviously fitting, right? Like the cliche, let's say, of like the artist who's always like looking inward rather than outward. So I mean, I think it fits.
It's also interesting to think about it as an Mifune as like a autobiographical, Kurosawa using him as an autobiographical character because Kurosawa began as a painter, which you can tell like in the way he shoots things, but he was a painter early on. I think he painted even like while making films as like a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels to me like the movie is flawed because we spend time with much more interesting characters, and then the Shimura stuff feels a little bit rote. But we should also mention there's a couple interesting outside of the movie stuff going on. So Mifune got married pretty soon before this film started to shoot.
Oh, congrats to him.
Congrats to Mifune. And he like at that point was making quite a bit of money. And so he and his wife moved very close to Shimura.
Oh.
They were so close that for reasons that are described in Emperor and the Wolf, the invitations for the wedding, like the reply cards that Mifune and his fiance sent out, went to Shimura's house. Like they were that level of close, which I just think is really, really interesting. And they'd worked together so much, but it was kind of like a father-son relationship, which is interesting in that is not at all paralleled in this movie. Like there's no, in the way that like Shimura is like patriarchal in other movies, he's not much of a father figure in this movie. He actually sucks at dadding in this movie. He's like a bad dad.
Yeah. I mean, he's not a father figure in the sense that he's not like an alpha father, but he's a father figure though in the sense that he like nearly sacrifices like his friendship or his potential love for this other man, to like save his daughter. So there's clearly something of like him being like a patriarchal figure.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, he's not like. Yeah, he's not like I don't know. He's not like the dad from Chinatown.
Jesus.
He's not that.
Yikes.
He's not that kind of dad.
Yeah, he's definitely doesn't have the like warmth. It's a really different Shimura performance, this one. It's a lot more like edgy. It's a lot more like he's doing a lot more performative tics kind of things. It's a really bad comparison, but I just thought about like the energy he has. It a little bit made me think about Howard Ratner and Uncut Gems. Not in the like details of it, but in the leaning into like being really intense and having a goal and like going for it all the time. Like he really does that, especially in his first scene when he peers in the window.
Yeah.
At, Mifune drawing pictures of Noriko Sengoku, who plays Sumi. And I really like that they've developed this relation. Like, Noriko Sengoku and Toshiro Mifune's relationship in all these films has a kind of similarity. They're like on equal footing, and they kind of like, this one, they're kind of like buddies, and they like go drinking together and like eat pastries together. And I really like those scenes. They feel very progressive, that this woman in his life, who's like his like life model, or his artist model is like telling him what to do and like being like, yo, pay me, I'll do it for you. I think that's a really fascinating. I want that movie.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to spend more time in Mifune's world. It's interesting though too, because, and we're not going to do it, right? Because Mifune's not in it, but I was thinking of Shimura's performance here and what he would do only a few years after here in Ikiru, which I've not.
Oh yeah.
Ikiru, which I've not seen actually, and I actually want to see it. But I was like, oh, this seems like it's a preamble perhaps to that movie, about like this kind of like marginalized person who has to basically like kind of contend with his conditions, right? Like his place in the world in this kind of very stark way.
Okay, so I think we kind of agree there's interesting things about the movie, but it doesn't ultimately work.
I mean, for me, it didn't. I mean, which is fine. I mean, if you liked it, which is great. I mean, you're wrong, but it's fine if you liked it. It's fine.
It's fine if you liked it, you fucking idiot.
you fucking
idiot. No, I liked it. I mean, I totally see your point. I think it's like a weirdly bisected movie. But there are a couple things that I thought would be interesting to talk about a little bit in terms of,
we haven't already talked about interesting things?
No, it's been really boring up to this point. Everyone fast forward to this point. So there's a couple things that are really interesting. You mentioned the bike, Mifune's motorcycle, as this like extension of his personality a little bit, which I think is like really, really interesting. We were talking a little bit about like that element and what it represents to him as a character. And there's a scene in this film early on where Mifune decides to sue Amour, the publishing company. And there are some really great montages in this movie. I think this movie capitalizes on the montages from Stray Dog and does like really interesting things in a much more condensed amount of time in terms of like showing the influence of like scandal magazines on people, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a montage where it keeps going between Hori being interviewed and AOA being interviewed. And they both have cigarettes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very good. Yeah.
And I kept thinking that reminded me a lot of like the idea of the Brechtian jest. Do you know what that is?
Well, go on. It's like the alienation effect, that thing?
Well, it's a little bit that. It's like the idea of, it's like an acting technique. So the idea of it's like a physical gesture that expresses an attitude or a single aspect of an attitude. So like, as opposed to being like overly psychological, an actor would do something that reveals something about their character in a gesture or a moment. So it's not psychologized, right?
Right.
And the way these two guys are handling their cigarettes as a way to like, this movie is about image and perception of image to some extent, especially in the first hour.
Totally, yeah.
And to watch these two guys be like super cool with their cigarettes is such a like, Kurosawa was really smart and he knew exactly kind of like how to express all these ideas in like the simplest kind of terms. And it feels the same thing with the motorcycle, where he explains like the motorcycle is my way of being an asshole, like not being an asshole, but like being carefree, whatever. And so when he revs it later in the movie, it's like a strong example of him like trying to break free from the situation he's in.
Without question. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think that...
Thank you.
Thank you. So we've mentioned Brecht, so we could check that off of for this episode as well.
Yeah, hang on, let me just add that pretentious. So, okay, so you surf, and you...
Is surfing pretentious?
Write poetry.
I mean, poetry is pretentious.
Talking about surfing is pretentious. For sure, talking about surfing is pretentious.
You think so?
Because it's like this thing that most people don't know how to do, and it's like,
well, I don't.
It's like mindfulness stuff. It's like, yeah, but of course, I'm not accusing you of being pretentious. Yeah. I'm just saying that like it has that way of being like,
you can.
Oh, I did this thing. Like you should just like sit in a room with a bunch of news media and a cigarette and be like,
fuck.
Yes,
I mean, I've definitely thought about
surfing.
taking up smoking because if it like looks cool.
Now, if there was ever a time to do damage to your respiratory system by your own choice, now is it.
I mean, we should be honest. Smoking is cool. Speaking of smoking and looking cool, we haven't discussed, at least for me, what the elephant in the room is. That this film also really reminded me of La Dolce Vita.
Oh, I've never seen that movie.
You shut the fuck up.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I've absolutely seen La Dolce Vita. It was a joke. Yeah, I saw it at Film Forum. when I lived in New York City. I watched it once at home and once at Film Forum.
I saw it with our friend Fennis, actually.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wait, no.
Sorry about that. Did he
No, sorry. I didn't see it with Fennis. What I saw with Fennis was that, like, that film that came out like 4 or 5 years ago that was like a ripoff of La Dolce Vita.
The Great Beauty?
Yes, The Great Beauty, which I also love.
Oh, I didn't actually see The Great Beauty. I should watch it.
The Great Beauty is great. But
what are they doing in Italy? What are we doing? It's making the same movies every 30 years. Just make superhero movies every 3.
I know,
that's what I suggest.
Fuck? Yeah, I want to see Fellini make a Spider-Man movie. I mean, obviously that can't happen because he's dead.
Spider-Man? No, he's still alive. He's fine.
Rip to a real one. Yeah, no, this, I mean, I was like, oh, this is like, I would not have been surprised if like Fellini saw this and was like, I wonder what the story would be like if it was told from the perspective of the paparazzo or obviously the guy writing for the scandal rag.
Which, by the way, Itaru Ozawa as Hori, it's a great performance. He's so good in this movie. He's like not given a ton of time, really effective. Kind of, there's a scene towards the end when it becomes clear that Hiruta is going to betray him and reveal that he bribed him, and he has this look on his face where it's like it's borderline one-dimensional, but it's such a good performance that I thought it was really, really great. The other thing that I think saves this movie, and this could totally be a projection. Well, let's see. We've talked about surfing. We've talked about guitars. We've talked about
Fellini, Brecht.
What about Foucault?
Ooh, yeah, I saw that in the notes, and I'm like, what are you talking? Oh, but we also mentioned Shakespeare.
We did. Oh, so we're so good on this one. So the reason I mentioned it is because there's a great podcast called Philosophize This. Have you ever listened to it?
I think maybe I have, but it's been a while.
Yeah, it's really good. It's just one guy with a microphone talking about philosophy. And I listen to it, and I will listen to episodes in order to get context for something that I want to read. And I've been listening to the section on postmodernism.
Right, and Foucault.
And it sort of inspired me to read Discipline and Punish, which I'm reading very slowly right now.
I'm a fan of both, by the way.
That book is hard to read. Both what?
Both Discipline and Punish.
Yeah, I know. You've got that Punisher T-shirt on,
with the Blue Lives Matter stripe.
The idea of the idea, and this isn't. I haven't gotten to this part of the book yet, but epistemes being this idea of like systems of. In like a very simple terms, this movie makes me think a little bit about the intersection between like a modern media culture and a pre-media culture, and the idea of like suddenly things that would not have been acceptable before
tabloids,
westernization,
right,
or like the influence of America post World War II suddenly become acceptable, and how Otokichi Hiruta Shimura's part like can't keep up with that. Like it feels like this movie is about like, again, this thing that
but what is it? Sorry, but what is it about the character that he can't keep? I mean, I don't understand. Like, what tension is it in society that he's like, oh, I can't deal with this because it's too Western? He just seems like he's just a fuck up.
He's a fuck up. But then there's the question of like, it's not that I don't know that Western is one way to read it. I wonder if part of it is that he's like the level of the degree to which like the press will debase people, or the scandal rags will debase people, almost seems like I don't think he expects to get bribed. There's the scene where he comes home very drunk to his daughter and he's like, oh, this guy is soulless. I can't keep up with it. He a little bit gets crushed by this like incessant need for profit and money. And this is a guy who's like a local lawyer. His office is on like the top floor of a building. It reminded me a little bit of what's the film one on the waterfront, the pigeons and on the waterfront, like this like top floor is the top office. Like he's kind of like a country lawyer who's just been thrust in this situation because he's both high-minded and needs money.
Now, I'm no big-time city lawyer, but this rag amour here is doing something wrong. So it just
felt like it is a movie that takes like, I don't know if maybe I'm full of shit when I say episteme, but it takes this like culture clash of like modern and older cultural values, and we watch them in transition.
Sure, but to complicate it is Mifune's character. Like that's where I think like Kurosawa is basically saying, in the sense that there's certain aspects of this, let's say, modern culture, like the tabloid rags, which are horrible and are cynical and are the worst aspects of them. But on the other hand, you have like the true artist like Mifune, who is a perfect blend of like both times, both cultures, and can kind of do both. And he's not in any sort of way like debased by it. If anything, he's that much more heroic because of it.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that's 100% true. But again, it ultimately ends up not being his movie.
Oh no, but I mean, what does that mean? Like,
Well, it's something we've talked about before, which is like, what ultimately is this movie saying? That's a good thing to talk about a little bit, like in terms of analyzing this. Like, what do you think the takeaway from this movie is?
I think the takeaway from this movie is, again, that there are certain aspects of modern. So I think this is where you're right in terms of like the epistemes, or like thinking about, let's say, the fact that like modern media constructs or makes possible the tabloid rag. And one of the things that the tabloid rag is all about is about cynicism, exploitation, and scandalous gossip.
Under the guise of modern psychology. There's a great scene where this guy's like, one of his friends is like, the painting's a masterpiece. He must have been in love when he was in those mountains. Yeah. And the narrativizing that goes on in that moment is so fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Under the guise of modern psychology, of course. Yeah,
not modern. I'm sorry, not modern psychology. That's the wrong term. Under the guise of like a cheap kind of cause and effect relationship rooted in like weird. I don't even know the non-truths. It's rooted in like the not truth. It's rooted on taking two things that maybe have no relationship and creating the corollary between them. To some extent.
Yes. Yeah. But again, on the other hand,
yes.
Again, like the film is saying that there are potentially, I mean, heroic might be the wrong word, but there are, let's say, beautiful things or potentially revelatory things about modern society, like the fact that one can be a modern artist and can paint things in a certain kind of way with a certain kind of vision that is not in any sort of way traditional. And that's great and that's powerful and that's beautiful. Yeah. And that the modern world tries to debase that.
Do you think this movie is a little bit then following in the themes of it seems like you've brought up in the past that there's a spiritual quality to Kurosawa's work and that he makes films about like, let's say, maintaining your spirituality in like a broken world a little bit. Yeah. Is this movie kind of about ways to live? Yes,
sure. Yeah, totally. But I also think, again, when it's far too didactic and heavy-handed, and that's why for me it like fails and becomes like really highly melodramatic.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a really fascinating object of its time.
Totally. Yeah, without question.
And interestingly, so the movie that comes after this one is Rashomon.
Can't wait.
Which is a pretty postmodern movie.
It is, yeah.
And this Scandal and Rashomon, Scandal is, no one remembers Scandal. Like Scandal, when we were planning the season, I was like, what's Scandal? I'd never seen it. But it ranked on the list, one of these lists in Japan, best movies in 1950. It ranked in this, it tied with Rashomon.
You mean like, for the 1950s?
Like in terms of like, this is the sixth best movie of the year is Scandal and Rashomon. No, of the year.
Oh, of the year. Sorry.
Like it was taken, this movie was like pretty well received. Yeah, it's a question, we're going to need to explore this and find someone to explore it with, but the degree to which like Kurosawa was and is perceived as a Western director, and like it feels like he has some complicated feelings about that.
Without
that
question.
You can see in this film a little bit.
No doubt.
And I guess also the question, like, to what extent is like the Westernization in this movie a kind of globalization? Or not in this movie, in his work in general.
Well, I mean, if you think of,
if
you just mean globalization by like the homogenization of cultures across the world that's spearheaded by like Western capital, then yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's an interesting tension in terms of when one thing that's becoming increasingly clear in watching these movies is the post World War II tension between, let's say, in the world, and specifically in like the way cultures are portrayed in the movies, and drawing that seems to be like a principle, at least in these early movies. I feel like that's a little bit of a principal concern of Akira Kurosawa.
Well, that's what I think, again, with this, when this film is, for me, at its most interesting, is when it becomes like a meta commentary of Kurosawa, again, working through his own relationship with his own kind of cultural milieu.
Ooh. I like
That's right. I said cultural milieu.
That's milieu. Everybody. So George, what's your podcast about? Well, we talk about surfing, cultural milieu, Foucault, Brecht, other dead dudes.
You're the one that mentioned Fukisi.
Who's Fukisi?
Foucault. That's what we call him in the biz. Call him Fukisi.
You absolutely do not.
We do. Yeah. I've published.
Who calls him that? Name 3 people who call him that.
Martin J.
Oh, cool. Okay. Have you ever noticed that every
Stanley Cavell, rest in peace,
every critical theorist
and Edward Said
decided to get Martin J's glasses? They all have those like skinny. They all got them. They're kind of like the ones I'm wearing, but I didn't study critical theory. Do you think people have tuned out yet? Because I have.
I mean, yeah, I
don't even know what we
should reach out to Marty J and be like, hey, Marty, what do you think about if you want to come on our podcast talk about Fukisi?
Is he 100 years old?
He is, yeah. He's definitely.
Well, Martin J, get your dialectical imagination together and get on this podcast,
baby. We know you're listening.
Is that the name of the book, Dialectical Imagination?
So I literally bought a copy of that book in Greece.
In Greek?
In Greece. It was
in Greece.
Yeah.
In Greek though, was it in Greek or was it in English?
In English.
Could you fucking imagine reading that book in another language? This is comparatively your second language.
There's this really beautiful bookstore in Santorini, and I walked in there and I bought it. I pulled it off, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to read this, and I'm like, I brought it to the shelf, to the cashier, and the guy looks at it and he's like, nerd alert, and I'm like, dude, just fucking ring me up. Like, Are
you serious?
Yeah, like just ring me up.
You're in a bookstore.
I know.
Who the hell does this guy think he is?
I was like, you're shitting on me.
You know what?
You're shitting on me,
Martin J. You're invited to the podcast. This fucking bookseller is not.
It's like you're shitting on me because I'm going to read. I mean, like, it is weird beach reading for sure. But
let's dox this guy.
But it's a great book. You should also read the dialect.
I tried to read Thus Spake Zarathustra on the beach.
Nice. And
I remember sitting there and my sister was like, you're a fucking weirdo. Like, what are you doing? It's like August on Cape Cod and you're reading Thus Spake Zarathustra.
Did you ever see that picture?
Didn't get through it, to be honest.
Did you ever see that picture of like Adorno in like his bathing suit on the beach? It's really kind of funny.
No, but I bet it's hot. I bet it's real hot.
Super hot.
Yeah, a failed movie, but an interesting movie. And we're about to kind of enter into the like golden age of their collaborations with things like, next up we have Rashomon, and then we're going to talk about, The Idiot, but which is a lesser known, but we're going to then have Seven Samurai, Throne of Blood. Like it's about to get litty up in here.
Can't fucking wait.
And it's going to be interesting to look back at these movies. I really enjoyed them. I have to say that I probably think the best one that we've seen so far is Stray Dog, but I like Scandal quite a bit too.
Yeah, I guess Stray Dog. What was the previous film we did that I really...
Drunken Angel.
Oh yeah, I love Drunken Angel.
Drunken Angel was real good. Yeah. They're all good. There's not a bad movie in this entire pack. Some are better than others, but... They're all pretty good.
They knew what they were doing.
Yeah, it seems like he knew what he was doing. Next up on the show, Rashomon with Alyssa Wilkinson.
Yay!
From Vox, who's going to come talk to us about it. I'm very, very excited. She recently saw this film for the first time, so she picked it.
She'll definitely have smarter things to say about it than...
I know, seriously. She's going to... Actually, if she listens to this episode, she's probably going to be like, oh,
it's like, maybe I should... Yeah, maybe we should not have announced her.
Yeah, maybe. Ooh, I gotta get it. Sorry, guys. You're cut. That's all. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show as soon as you can. We now have a Patreon.
We do. So
links to that. It's $3 a month. You get an extra episode and a short essay every month by George Mad Dog Fragopoulos.
That is.
What would your nickname be?
That is my official. Actually, that's actually my Christian Greek name.
George Mad Dog Fragopoulos.
Mad Dog, yeah. Fragopoulos.
Mad Dog.
Yeah.
It's Greek for Mad Dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna. You give us $3 a month, you get some extra stuff. It's gonna be great. We're very excited. We've been talking about doing this for a long time. So we finally did do it. That's it. Anything else?
No, that's it. I'll definitely be writing something about Kurosawa though. For the Patreon.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, it makes sense. Checks out.
I mean, we're doing
Checks out in terms of what we're talking about. Yeah, we're going to do one about him, and then we'll do one about Michael Bay.
Yeah. Well, the Michael Bay essay is really long. It's about 30,000 words right now. It's actually more of a... It's turning into a book.
You've been working on it.
It's kind of turning into a book.
What's it called? Shades of Bay?
Shades of Bay. 50 Shades of Bay.
50 Shades of Bay. That's about our friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to make up an academic name for a book about Michael Bay. But
I'll definitely think of one, and I'll
please do for the next episode. I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
This was Oeuvre Busters Deep Dives by Dialectical Dudes.
Hang 10, bros.
Nice, brah.
Ride the barrel, brah.
Die, brah.